Imagine someone you know, friendly, charming, intelligent. Maybe a colleague, maybe a friend, maybe even yourself. Now imagine that same person silently calculating your weaknesses, smiling as they twist your trust, just slightly, for their own advantage. Not in some cartoonish villain way, but in an everyday, quiet, believable manner. That unsettling smile, that harmless joke that hits too close, that manipulation you cannot prove. Welcome to the shadow. We are taught to spot evil by its obviousness. Serial killers, war criminals, violent dictators. The world tells us that evil is out there, far from us, locked away in some broken soul who never learned empathy. But what if that belief is the most dangerous lie ever told? You see, evil rarely arrives wearing horns. More often it arrives dressed in charm, ambition, and logic. It speaks in persuasive tones. It wears the uniform of leadership, sometimes even the robes of justice. The origins of dark psychology lie not in some distant corner of the human experience, but right at its center. It is not the shadow of humanity. It is the source. You were born with it. So was I. For centuries, philosophers and psychologists alike have asked, where does evil come from? Is it something we are taught, something we become, or is it something we inherit? Hidden deep within the folds of evolution, could it be that the very instincts that helped us survive are the same forces now feeding our darkest behaviors? That is the question nobody wants to ask out loud, because if the answer is yes, if dark psychology is not an anomaly, but a feature, then we must face the horrifying reality that what we call evil may just be part of what it means to be human. What if the path to survival was never about empathy, but dominance? Not about honesty, but deception? What if those who mastered fear, not love, were the ones who shaped the world we now live in? And now comes the worst part. If darkness is not an invasion, but an inheritance, then how do you know that your own thoughts, your own instincts, your own kindness are not just carefully managed tools of control? How do you know that your empathy is real and not just another tactic? What you are about to discover will not comfort you, but it will open your eyes, because the true origins of dark psychology do not begin with a crime or a twisted mind or a broken past. They begin in nature, in biology, in the logic of survival. Stay with this video until the very end. There is something you need to see, something buried beneath your understanding of yourself, a piece of truth so close to your daily life, it hides in plain sight, because once you see it, you can never unsee it. Since childhood, you were likely told a comforting story, maybe not in words, but in the way people looked at you, protected you, praised you when you did something kind. The story sounded like this: most people are good at heart. You believed it. Most of us did. It is a beautiful idea, poetic even, that deep down, beneath the noise and trauma, humans are innately good, that morality is our nature, not our exception, that evil is the glitch, the rare malfunction of a broken fuse. But what if it was all a myth? What if that belief was not a reflection of human nature, but a carefully constructed lie, a necessary illusion to keep us from seeing what we are truly capable of, not to protect others from us, but to protect us from the horror of ourselves? The truth, hidden beneath layers of cultural storytelling and romantic philosophies, is far colder. In psychological terms, humans are not wired for goodness. We are wired for adaptability, and sometimes doing what is good serves that adaptability, but often it does not. The work of evolutionary psychologists like David Buss reveals something disturbing. He notes that traits such as deceit, manipulation, and even cruelty are not outliers in human behavior. They are strategic adaptations. In certain environments, being kind does not ensure survival. Being cunning does. From an evolutionary standpoint, you do not pass on your genes by being fair. You do it by being effective. Whether that means faking love, feigning loyalty, or betraying trust, it does not matter. What matters is outcome. So if evolution favors survival, and survival rewards manipulation, then ask yourself, What kind of psychology would nature select? The answer is clear. Nature would reward dark psychology. This is where the origins of evil begin, not in demons or trauma alone, but in the cold mechanics of biology. Evolutionary psychology tells us that traits we call dark may not be errors at all, but finely tuned tools crafted by time. That is not just a theory, it is a pattern, one we see echoed across every civilization, every power structure, every personal relationship built on subtle control. You may want to believe that your empathy, your compassion, your moral compass are uniquely yours, but how much of your behavior is real, and how much is just socially optimized performance? There is a reason why narcissists rise faster in leadership, why sociopaths succeed in negotiation, why manipulation works better than honesty in most high-stake environments. These are not accidents, they are echoes of something ancient, something deeper than social conditioning. You have been taught to chase goodness, but goodness is not what built this world. The most brutal paradox is this: if you had lived 1,000 years ago, born into survival, warfare, starvation, you would not have survived by being kind. You would have had to become what you now fear. And if that is true, then who are you really? Beneath your civilized identity, what instincts still remain? What urges are suppressed but never destroyed? We will uncover these dark instincts in ways you might not expect. But before we go further, pause for a moment and reflect. What have you believed about yourself that might not be true? And now I want to ask you, not as a viewer, but as a fellow human in search of uncomfortable truth, to do something meaningful. Like this video, if it made you question your beliefs. Subscribe if you are ready to explore the dark corners of the human mind with brutal honesty. And comment below what is one lie about human nature that you were taught to believe. What you write might wake someone else up. This is only the beginning. The truth runs deeper than you think. You were not born into peace. You were born into a species shaped by millions of years of fear, scarcity, and death. The modern world is a thin layer of glass over something far older, far colder, far more cunning. Behind your thoughts, behind your kindness, behind your logic, there is strategy. You are the product of minds that outmaneuvered extinction, and those minds did not survive because they were good. They survived because they were dark. Evolutionary psychology does not care about morality. It cares about survival. And when you look at the patterns of human behavior through that lens, something terrifying emerges. Acts of betrayal, deceit, and cruelty are not bugs in the human system. They are features, necessary features. Imagine a prehistoric tribe. Food is scarce. Threats are everywhere. Trust is currency, but so is fear. In this world, what benefits the group might destroy the individual, and what protects the individual might poison the group. Survival means choosing, not choosing right or wrong, choosing what works. And what works most of the time is control. According to Leda Cosmides and John Tooby, pioneers of evolutionary psychology, the human mind evolved domain-specific mechanisms to handle problems like cheating, alliance formation, and social ranking. That means your brain has built-in tools to detect threats, manipulate outcomes, and manage impressions, often below the level of your awareness. Think about that. Your brain is not just built to love and cooperate. It is built to compete, to calculate, and to deceive. Robert Trivers, a renowned evolutionary biologist, once wrote that the essence of self-deception is to fool ourselves to better fool others. You lie to yourself, so your lies to others are more convincing. It is not only manipulation, it is self-preservation. This is not philosophy, this is biology. Here is where it becomes personal. How often have you smiled when you were angry, complimented someone you despised, pretended to care, said "I'm fine" when you were breaking inside? You called it politeness, but it was strategy. This is not to say that all kindness is a mask, but if you examine it closely, you will find that even your most altruistic actions often contain hidden motives. The desire to belong, to be liked, to be seen as good, to avoid punishment, to gain favor. When stripped to its evolutionary core, goodness becomes conditional. It becomes transactional. Even something as sacred as love can become a tool. Attachment, jealousy, loyalty. These are evolutionary adaptations to secure mating, protect offspring, and guard resources. And when threatened, love does not produce peace. It produces rage, possessiveness, control. That is not a moral flaw, that is an evolutionary pattern. If dark psychology feels unnatural to you, that is because your culture has trained you to resist your nature. But what happens when that training fails? When food is gone, when rules collapse, when danger knocks louder than morality speaks, what emerges first? Is it compassion, or is it something else? Maybe you have never truly met yourself, because the circumstances that awaken your oldest instincts have never arrived, but they live in you, always waiting. There is a reason why stories of apocalypse, war, and chaos fascinate us. We are not just afraid of them, we are drawn to them because a part of you wants to know, who would you become? The paradox is brutal. The instincts that built civilization are the same ones that can destroy it. The tools of survival are also the tools of manipulation. Your capacity for darkness is not the exception, it is the foundation. And if evolution shaped you into a being of control, desire, and strategy, then how much of your goodness is a choice? We are only beginning to look through this lens, but it changes everything. Are you still willing to look deeper? You might imagine dark psychology as something distant, extreme, reserved for criminals or sociopaths. But that illusion is precisely why it works. The darkest traits rarely show up with blood on their hands. They show up smiling, shaking your... In everyday life, darkness wears a suit. It gives TED Talks. It wins awards. It builds companies. It earns trust. And sometimes, it tells you it loves you. Let us speak clearly now. There are 3 psychological traits most closely associated with what researchers call the dark triad: narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. Separately, they can appear subtle. Combined, they are lethal and more common than you think. Narcissism is not confidence. It is exploitation disguised as charm. It is the quiet hunger for admiration, masked by the illusion of leadership. It knows how to play the role of the hero, all while demanding the spotlight for saving the show. Machiavellianism is not intelligence. It is emotional calculation. It is watching without blinking, learning how you move, what you need, when you are weak. It is the manipulation of perception, the slow pressure on invisible strings. Psychopathy is not madness. It is the removal of empathy from decision-making. It is cold logic, without conscience. Sometimes it is loud and violent. More often, it is calm and patient, smiling in silence, while others bleed emotionally. These traits are not rare diseases. They are increasingly normalized behaviors in our modern culture. Consider this. In a hyper-competitive world, where status is power, where personal branding replaces personal depth, where public image becomes currency, what happens to empathy? In workplaces, narcissists are more likely to rise to positions of influence. In dating, psychopathic traits are often confused with confidence. In politics, Machiavellians often become the architects of public opinion. These are not coincidences. They are reflections of what we reward. If you doubt this, take a closer look at the content you consume. Who gets the most attention online? The kind ones, the soft-spoken, or those who dominate, provoke, seduce, and control? The truth is uncomfortable. Society is not just tolerating dark traits, it is celebrating them. Now pause and look inward. Have you ever manipulated someone's emotions to get what you wanted? Even just a little? Ever withheld truth, not to protect them, but to protect yourself? Ever enjoyed being right more than being kind? Of course you have, and that is not because you are broken. It is because you are human. This is not about self-blame. It is about self-awareness. The masks we wear are not just for others, they are for ourselves. You tell yourself you are being strategic, playing the game, protecting your peace. But how many of those justifications are just shadows of the dark triad, wearing softer names? You are surrounded by masks. and sometimes you are wearing one too. It is not the presence of darkness that defines you, it is your willingness to see it. The question is not, are you a good person? That question assumes you already know yourself. The better question is, when you are no longer being watched, who do you become? The darker truth is this: you might be wearing someone else's mask, one you picked up from your parents, your boss, your heroes. Maybe you never chose it, maybe you just never took it off. And now we come to a question that will linger until it is answered. If darkness is so deeply woven into everyday behavior, then how do we ever know if someone's kindness is real? How do you know if your own? You have been taught to fear evil as something loud, monstrous, and foreign. But history shows us a darker pattern. Evil rarely begins with hate. It begins with control. The desire to control others, to shape outcomes, to bend the environment toward your will, is not an unnatural drive. It is deeply human. Sometimes it hides behind a job title, other times behind a cause. Often it hides behind the phrase, "I was just following orders." One of the most disturbing psychological experiments in history was conducted by Stanley Milgram in the early 1960s. Volunteers were instructed to administer electric shocks to another participant, who, unknown to them, was an actor. As the shocks increased in intensity, the actor would scream, plead, even fall silent. Yet most participants, urged by an authority figure in a lab coat, continued pressing the button. They were not sadists. They were ordinary people. Milgram's conclusion shook the world. Most people will inflict harm, not out of cruelty, but out of obedience to perceived authority. This is the terrifying part. Evil does not need hate. It only needs permission. In 1971, Philip Zimbardo took it further with the Stanford prison experiment. Participants were assigned roles, guards and prisoners in a simulated prison environment. Within days, the guards, all regular college students, began to show signs of psychological abuse, humiliation, and sadism toward the prisoners. The experiment, intended to last 2 weeks, was shut down after only 6 days. Zimbardo's insight was devastating. Situations have the power to awaken darkness in people who otherwise appear normal. When given control without accountability, human nature tilts toward cruelty. Power, unchecked, erodes empathy. The more control you have, the easier it becomes to dehumanize. Not because you suddenly become evil, but because the mind naturally detaches when it no longer has to feel consequences. Here is the part we never want to admit. You do not need to be broken to become cruel. You only need a system that allows it, and you only need the right justification. Think of your own life. Have you ever hurt someone emotionally, not out of rage, but because you could? Ever silenced someone, dismissed them, judged them, just because they could not fight back? You may say it was small, it did not matter, but small acts of control are the seeds of larger harm. And when those seeds are watered by authority, fear, or belief, they grow into monstrosity. It is easy to look back at history and ask, how could they do that? But perhaps the real question is, what would you have done if the uniform had been yours? Control gives comfort. It creates a sense of order, but it also blinds you to the humanity of those you dominate. When someone becomes a task, a label, a threat, or a statistic, you stop seeing them, and that is when the worst decisions feel logical. This is the core of dark psychology, the capacity to justify harm, not with hatred, but with reason. Power corrupts not because it changes people, but because it reveals them. And if you think you are immune, think again. Control is not just a weapon in the hands of dictators or soldiers. It is present in your relationships, your language, your silence, your choices. Every time you use your advantage to bend another's will, even slightly, you walk the edge of that same darkness. So now, a question you will carry forward. If the only thing stopping you from cruelty is the fear of consequences, then who are you when no one is watching? If you are still watching, it means something inside you is searching, not just for answers, but for understanding, for a way to make sense of the contradiction between what you believe you are and what you fear you might be. So here is the question that philosophers and psychologists have asked for centuries. Are we born evil, or are we made that way? It is not a question of guilt, it is a question of origin. One perspective, deeply rooted in ancient religion, claims that humans are born in sin, that darkness lives within you from the very first breath. It is not a choice, it is a condition. Another view, proposed by Enlightenment thinkers like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, suggests the opposite, that we are born pure, innocent, and shaped into cruelty by the broken systems around us. And then there are those who say we are born empty, blank, with the potential to become anything based on experience and environment. That morality, like language, is something we are taught. But as science has evolved, so has our understanding of the mind, and the answers are not so comforting. Modern neuroscience suggests that certain predispositions, like lack of empathy, high impulsivity, or reduced fear response, can be biologically inherited. That means some people are born with brains that simply process morality differently, not because of trauma, not because of culture, but because of how their brain is wired. Yet at the same time, trauma does shape behavior. Abuse, neglect, emotional deprivation. These can deform the moral compass. They can create people who harm, not because they were born to, but because the world taught them that love is a lie and power is the only truth. So which is it? Do we carry evil in our genes, or do we learn it through pain? The real terror lies in the answer no one wants to accept. It is both. You inherit the structure, the world provides the trigger. You may never act on your darker impulses, but they are there. And if you had lived a different life, walked through different pain, would those impulses have won? Think about someone you judge, someone whose actions repulse you, a criminal, a manipulator, a killer. Now imagine if you had been born in their place, with their body, their brain, their childhood, their trauma. Would you still be you, or would you be them? The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche warned that when you gaze long into the abyss also gazes into you. But what if the abyss is not just out there? What if it lives inside you? You may believe in free will. That is comforting. It allows you to claim your goodness as a choice. But what if that choice was never fully yours? If your decisions are shaped by chemicals, memory, reward systems, and fear responses, then how much of your morality is truly chosen? And if evil is both born and made, then who deserves blame? Who deserves punishment? Who deserves forgiveness? Here is a paradox that cuts deep. If someone is evil but had no control over becoming that way, are they still responsible? You will not find a clean answer, because none exists. That is what makes dark psychology so haunting. It does not give you villains, it gives you mirrors. The only thing more terrifying than evil people is the realization that they are not so different from you. So now ask yourself, not in theory but in quiet honesty, if your life had unraveled just a little differently, would your reflections still comfort you? You believe you control your thoughts, that you are in charge, that your choices reflect your soul, your will, your values. But the closer you look at the brain, the less that belief holds. Darkness is not just a metaphor, it is biological. Somewhere inside your skull, behind the calm expression you show to the world, a network of cells is constantly measuring threat, reward, and power. These are not opinions. They are not reflections of your upbringing. They are electrical signals moving through neural pathways shaped by millions of years of survival. And when it comes to the roots of evil, certain structures stand out. The amygdala, deep in the limbic system, processes fear and aggression. In individuals with high psychopathic tendencies, studies show reduced activity in the amygdala when exposed to emotionally disturbing images. That means the biological seat of fear and empathy can be quiet, unmoved. You do not choose this silence, you inherit it, or you develop it under stress so severe, the brain rewires itself to stop feeling what it cannot afford to process. Then there is the prefrontal cortex, responsible for rational thought and impulse control. In violent offenders, neuroimaging often reveals deficits in this area. Less activity, weaker regulation. The brakes are broken, and when the brakes fail, the instinct drives. But the most disturbing finding is this: the same areas of the brain that activate during acts of empathy can also be activated during acts of dominance, depending on the individual, the context, and the goal. In other words, the brain does not differentiate morality from strategy. It only measures reward. This explains why people can commit horrific acts and feel nothing, or worse, feel pleasure. Power, to the brain, is intoxicating. When someone experiences control over another human being, the dopaminergic system, the same system involved in addiction, lights up. Control feels good. Empathy can feel weak. It is not just criminals who show this wiring. In corporate hierarchies, individuals with traits linked to narcissism and manipulation tend to outperform their peers, not because they are more competent, but because they suppress guilt, mask charm, and seek power with single-minded focus. The brain rewards them. Society promotes them. This is the cruel loop. The biology that disables empathy is often the same biology that enables success. And if that is true, you must ask yourself how much of your own success has been driven by the parts of you that feel least human. When you ignored someone's pain because it was inconvenient. When you won an argument not because you were right, but because you dominated. When you used your silence as a weapon. Those were not moral choices, they were neurological shortcuts. You might say, but I would never hurt someone. But hurt does not always look like bruises. It can look like distance, like indifference, like silence in moments that called for compassion. And your brain will not protest. If the silence serves your interests, it will reward you for it. You are not evil for having this wiring, but you are responsible for recognizing it. Because if you continue to believe that your mind is a cathedral of virtue, you will never see the places where the lights have gone out. What do you do with a brain that finds pleasure in control? What do you do with a mind that calculates suffering like a strategy? The question is not whether you are capable of darkness. The question is, how often do you mistake it for strength? You were not born in isolation. Your morality was not formed in silence. From your first breath, you were shaped by systems, schools, governments, families, workplaces that taught you how to behave. But they did not always teach you how to be human. You were told to obey, to conform, to succeed. But rarely were you told to question the rules that defined those words. And in that quiet, dark psychology found its most efficient disguise, not in rebellion, but in structure. Society manufactures behavior. That is its job. But sometimes what it manufactures is not safety. It is submission. Think of the workplace. Who rises to power? Often, it is not the kindest, the most empathetic, or the most ethical. It is the ones who manage perception. Those who know how to bend without breaking, to dominate without appearing threatening. Those who hide ruthlessness behind diplomacy. They are not punished, they are promoted. In politics, the most persuasive leaders are often not the most moral. They are the most calculated. They know how to manufacture consent. They know how to use fear, language, and identity to polarize, not unify, to command, not serve, and we reward them with loyalty. This is not theory. It is observable. It is real. You see it in education, where conformity is valued more than critical thought. Children are rewarded for obedience, not curiosity, punished for asking why, taught not to challenge authority, but to seek its approval. And what does that create? A generation of minds that mistake silence for virtue, compliance for peace, and obedience for character. Here lies the most dangerous trick of dark psychology. It thrives in systems, not despite them, but because of them. You are more likely to obey an unethical command if it comes from a system you trust. That is what the Milgram experiment proved. That ordinary people will cause harm if the instruction comes with institutional approval. We like to think that evil is a person, but more often evil is a structure, a policy, a chain of command, a silent protocol. And here is where it becomes personal again. Think about your life. Have you ever enforced a rule you did not believe in, followed an order that felt wrong, stayed silent in the face of injustice, because speaking would cost you comfort. You may have told yourself it was not your responsibility, that you were just one piece of the machine. But machines do not move on their own. They are powered by the quiet obedience of people like you. And this is where the paradox deepens. You may feel powerless in the face of injustice, but the truth is, the most dangerous evil is not committed by the powerful. It is permitted by the passive, by those who turn their heads, sign the forms, check the boxes, and whisper, "It is not my place." But it is. Your silence has weight. Your obedience has consequence. And the system knows this. That is why it does not need to force you. It only needs to condition you. You are easier to control when you believe that control is your duty. Now here is a question to carry into your next encounter with authority. When was the last time you questioned the rules you followed? And if those rules demanded your silence in the face of harm, would you still follow them? Now you know the structures, the biology, the philosophies, the games. You have seen how power moves through obedience, how systems reward silence, how the mind calculates harm without remorse. You have heard how darkness is not rare, but regular, structured, practiced, even admired. So it is time to face the question you have been avoiding. What does dark psychology say about you? Not about killers, not about leaders, not about corrupt systems, about you. If you strip away the mask of your good intentions, if you peel back your self-image, what remains? Do you really think your mind is untouched by manipulation, by power, by deceit? Do you believe your empathy has never been selective, your kindness never strategic, your silence never weaponized? Look back at your life, not just the regrets. Look deeper, the moments you benefited from someone else's weakness, the times you saw a chance to dominate and took it, the opportunities you had to speak truth and chose to protect your image instead. Maybe you said nothing when a friend was being humiliated. Maybe you lied to keep someone attached to you. Maybe you used someone's love as leverage. Maybe you won an argument you did not deserve because you knew exactly where to hit. You were not possessed. You were not broken. You were simply human. That is the truth that dark psychology reveals. Not that evil exists, but that it lives in you. You were built with the capacity for love, yes, but also the capacity for harm. You have inherited instincts for trust and for betrayal, for empathy and for dominance. The same mind that comforts a crying child can also manipulate a lover. The same hand that reaches to help can also hold down. This is not a flaw in your character, it is a fact of your design. And if you deny that darkness, you do not become innocent, you become blind. You cannot master what you refuse to acknowledge. So here is the turning point. If you have the courage to look inward, honestly, without excuse, without narrative, then write this in the comments. Not for attention, not for others, but for yourself. I have seen the shadow in me. Let the world read it. Let it be the beginning of your awareness, because the people who write it are not the dangerous ones. The dangerous ones are the ones who refused, the ones who pretend, the ones who smile with eyes empty of truth, the ones who perform virtue to hide their need for control. Dark psychology is not about monsters, it is about mirrors. And the truth you now see is not a curse, it is a responsibility. You can no longer look at cruelty and say, "I could never," because now you know. You could, you might, you already have. The question is not whether you are capable of evil. The question is, what will you do with that knowledge? You came here to learn about darkness, about the psychology of cruelty, manipulation, control, about where evil begins. And you found it, but you did not find it in history books, not in war criminals, serial killers, or corrupt tyrants. You found it in instinct, in biology, in obedience, in mirrors. You found it in yourself. That is the truth people spend lifetimes avoiding, not because they are weak, but because it is unbearable. The moment you realize that everything you once blamed on monsters, you now see in your own reflection, there is no escape from that, only awareness. And awareness is a burden. It demands that you no longer live passively, no longer sleep behind your smile, no longer use goodness as a costume. It demands that you see your darkness, not to indulge it, not to fear it, but to understand it, because until you see it, it controls you. This is the tragedy of denial. It turns ordinary people into puppets of their own shadow. They believe they are righteous, but they do not see how they manipulate, how they dominate, how they betray quietly, strategically, and often with a smile. They think they are light, but they are only pretending to stand in it. You are different now. You cannot unknow what you know. You cannot return to the comfort of ignorance. The illusions are broken. The story that humans are naturally good has been unraveled, not as an attack, but as a doorway, because real goodness is not inherited. It is earned every day, not by pretending darkness is not there, but by choosing not to serve it. You still have choices, but now you make them with your eyes open, and that is the only kind of freedom worth having. So do not close this video looking for comfort. There is none here. There is only truth. You are not who you thought you were, but you are more powerful than you realized, because the moment you accept your darkness is the moment it stops using you. If this journey meant something to you, if it disturbed you, awakened you, or even made you question your own reflection, then like this video not because I asked you to, but because it felt necessary. Subscribe, not to follow a channel, but to follow a path, one that will continue to expose what most people refuse to see. Share this video with someone who wears a mask so well they may have forgotten who they are beneath it. And remember this: the most dangerous evil in the world is the one that thinks it is good. We are just getting started. There are more truths buried beneath your beliefs. Stay awake, stay watching, and stay ready to descend further. You will not be the same.